Hi, let's quickly look at the presidents here, just real briefly, and get through all the presidents and just talk about tiny bit about each one here, just to hit them. And Washington, the first president here, George Washington, John Jay's Treaty, very controversial, keeps us out of war with Great Britain. Judiciary Act of 1789 is another accomplishment, setting up the judicial branch. He has to deal with Citizen Genet, this Frenchman who's in America, who's trying to rally anti-British support, drag America into a war with Britain because Britain and France are constantly fighting. He's famous for a well address, avoid political parties, don't go into debt, avoid all these foreign entangling alliances. Although he disapproved of political parties, a lot of people say he acted as if he was a Federalist. The next president, Federalist, John Adams. He's famous for the Alien and Sedition Acts. Very, very, very controversial. The alien part of the Alien and Sedition Acts kept the French and Irish from voting right away compared to other immigrants. They said this is for America's protection because the French and Irish hate the British, are trying to get us into war with Great Britain. So, and then the sedition part is that if you criticize the government, you could be imprisoned or fined. The Jeffersonian Republicans said, well, wait a minute, you're just doing this to help keep you in power because the Irish and the French vote for us, the Jeffersonian Republicans. You know, and if the government is controlled by the Federalists in the White House, the Federalists in the Senate, Federalists in the House of Representatives, any criticism is against your party, is in essence. And so it's very, very controversial. The XYZ affair is something else that happens under John Adams. France and Britain, but in this case France, had been stopping our boats, stealing our cargo because they're upset that we were honoring, you know, the American Revolutionary help that they had given us to help us beat Britain, so that we're not helping them fight Britain right now. So they stop our boats, steal our cargo, and we sent diplomats over to France to try to alleviate this problem. And essentially, these diplomats are basically told, you know, you need to basically give us a bribe, you need to give us a loan, or else we're not even going to listen to what you have to say. And so you get the slogan, you know, millions for defense, but not one penny for tribute. We'll spend a lot of money building up our Navy, which Adams did, but we're not going to pay to buy your respect. So that's John Adams there. Also, he appoints John Marshall to the Supreme Court, one of the most successful justices of all time. Jefferson, the Revolution of 1800, where you have the first transition of political parties taking control. And Jefferson basically says, you know, in his inauguration, you know, we are all Federalists, we're all Republicans, meaning, you know, we're all Americans on the same boat. Let's cooperate, let's work together. Jefferson's known for the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, doubles the size of the country. Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the route to the Pacific. You know, he really struggles with handling Britain and France stopping our cargo, you know, the Embargo Act and all that, and just struggles with that. He doesn't have a good time as president, so he doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't even put it on his tombstone, but he puts other accomplishments on his tombstone. The next president is James Madison, who's reluctantly gets dragged into the War of 1812. Doesn't go very well. Dolly Madison, his wife, running out of the White House with George Washington's portrait before the British put the torch to the building. Madison also, he had helped Jefferson kill the first national bank. But after the War of 1812, he realizes, you know, maybe we're better off with it. And he institutes the second national bank. And so that's a quick rundown of Madison there. Number 5 is Monroe, James Monroe. The era of good feelings. The Federalist parties essentially died off after the War of 1812. The Hartford Convention makes them be seen as anti-American, not patriotic. So the Monroe, one-party rule, the era of good feelings. But you also get this interesting foreign policy piece that lasts for a long time. The Monroe Doctrine, believed to have been written by John Quincy Adams, but issued by Monroe. And basically the Monroe Doctrine, you know, the Western Hemisphere's America's sphere of influence. European countries, no new colonies. You can keep the ones you have. If you lose them, they're gone forever. America's going to foster the growth of democracy, but we'll also stay out of Europe's hair and their sphere of influence. So after Monroe, then we have John Quincy Adams, the son of Abigail and John Adams, the other president, the first father-son duo here. He's known for winning this 1824 corrupt bargain election against Andrew Jackson and just butting heads with Andrew Jackson. John Quincy Adams supports Henry Clay's American system, you know, internal improvements, tariffs to help fund it. So the seventh president is Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson is one of the more controversial presidents. He's seen as the supporter of universal white male suffrage. He gets involved in a lot of things. He kills the bank war, the second bank in the United States, the nullification crisis. He basically uses the threat of violence and force to keep South Carolina from threatening to break off the country or trying to break off the country, and then to eventually pay the tariffs. But Henry Clay gets this compromise tariff in the nullification crisis. He's also known for Indian removal and disobeying Supreme Court orders on that topic. Very, very controversial president. Does a few things well, does some things horrifically. It's really hard to judge him. You kind of have to back yourself away from him because he did do a lot of negative things in a lot of regards, but very influential nonetheless. Andrew Jackson's hand-picked successor actually has to try to clean up Andrew Jackson's economic mess. Martin Van Buren is the next president, and the Panic of 1837 basically just dominates his presidency, ruins his presidency. His opponent's called Martin Van Ruin because the economy's so bad. But Andrew Jackson actually kind of sets up the economy to fail a bit. I mean, the removal of the second bank in the United States doesn't help. The specie circular that Andrew Jackson puts in place, where you have to use gold, silver, hard currency to buy land, doesn't help because it actually makes it harder for the middle class and lower income people to get their hands on silver and gold to buy land with. It was actually meant to help them in Jackson's mind, but it backfired, the specie circular there. And then the Whigs finally get their president, their first president, and you have William Henry Harrison. However, he is the shortest serving president ever. He dies quickly into his term. He gives this long inaugural address in this cold rain, and believed to have catch pneumonia and have died. Now some people are saying he might have died from cholera or something like that. But he's like this log cabin president. His opponents say, you know, he's this log cabin guy, drinks hard cider. But he takes that to his advantage, and the public loves it. I drink hard cider just like you. I live in a log cabin, born in a log cabin just like you. And it appeals to these Western voters out west. Remember, out west back then is places like Indiana and Michigan and places like that. But the first Whig, and he dies quickly in office. The problem is his vice president isn't also a Whig. So it kind of stinks from the Whig point of view. But the 10th president here is going to be Tyler. In fact, the campaign slogan was Tippecanoe and Tyler too, because William Henry Harrison was this famous general who beat the Native Americans in Indiana at the Battle of Tippecanoe. But Tyler, basically he's famous for annexing Texas. He's not a Whig, so he clashes with the Whigs in Congress. His cabinet resigns, so there's a lot of conflict in his presidency. And then the 11th president is, even more than Tyler, considered the manifest destiny president. James K. Polk. That starts the Mexican-American War, intimidates Mexico into basically attacking first. We take northern Mexico, half of their land roughly, and he pays for it, but he takes it by the gunpoint. So we have Polk here, and very controversial because a lot of people say, well, you know, he provoked this war. Lincoln complains, you know, with the spot resolution. He provokes this war with Mexico. But then at the same time, people say, well, you know, isn't it good that we have California and Nevada and all those western states that we got from it? He also threatens Canada, which is controlled by Great Britain at the time, 54-40 or fight, which is where he wants the northern border to be. However, he compromises at a lower amount. We get the Oregon territory, 100% ours. Before it was kind of like quasi half and half controlled, jointly controlled. So he officially makes us sea to shining sea. He also lowers some tariffs. In terms of presidents, though, although he does very controversial things, he might say, he's up front. He says, you elect me, this is basically what I'm going to do, and then he goes off and does it. In terms of fulfilling campaign pledges, he might be the most honest president in terms of saying this is what I'm going to do, than actually doing it. You remember the people wanted Manifest Destiny at the time, right? The next president is actually a general. He's a one-term by choice, by the way, Polk. The next president is actually a general of that Mexican-American War, Taylor. But he's going to, like, pretty soon into office. He's trying to preserve the Union. You can see the North and South drifting further and further apart with this new land acquired from the Mexican-American War. And he's trying to avoid the expansion of slavery here. But the 13th president we're going to get here is going to be Fillmore. And Fillmore is known for the Compromise of 1850, very, very controversial. You might remember Compromise of 1850 lets California in as a free state. The tough Fugitive Slave Act. He believes that it does a few other things too, like opens popular sovereignty up to the New Mexico territory, Utah territories, but bans buying and selling slaves in the capital. You can still own slaves, just can't buy or sell them. He believes this is going to be like a long-term solution. It's not. So he fails at this long-term solution that Fillmore's trying to get. Taylor had actually been trying to get a compromise, couldn't get it done. Fillmore quickly gets the Compromise of 1850 through. But a very controversial compromise, makes the tensions even worse. Fillmore's kind of a moderate. He doesn't like the radical abolitionists who want to end slavery everywhere, but he doesn't like those Southerners who are trying to force it into westward lands. He takes more of a moderate approach, willing to compromise. The 14th president here is going to be Pierce, and he's going to do the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act basically undoes the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The Kansas and Nebraska territories can now, essentially, the people can vote, and slavery had been prohibited there from the Missouri Compromise. Now it's potentially open, exacerbates the tensions between North and South severely. The 15th president we're going to do is Buchanan. He's considered one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. Buchanan, you know, he says his position is it's illegal for the southern states to secede, but it's illegal for me as president to stop them. So there's a lot of inaction. He does very, 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 very little to try to stop the southern states. You know, he attacks the Mormons out in Utah. It doesn't go over very well. He tries a few different things and fails at a lot of them. He's a northerner. He's from Pennsylvania, but he's a bit of a southern sympathizer in a lot of ways. And so he's considered one of the worst presidents ever, and I don't have a problem with that assessment personally. The 16th president, hopefully you have heard about, is Abraham Lincoln. You know, the rail splitter from Illinois, grew up in a log cabin and all that, but self-educated. But, you know, he really is a great president. And you look at him, in my opinion, and you look at him, you know, he helps preserve the Union at this tough time. I mean, it's arguably the greatest crisis our country has ever faced, the Civil War. And, you know, the issues, the Emancipation Proclamation, which was very controversial, freed the slaves in the rebel areas, but not the loyal slave areas. He says, I don't have the legal authority to do that. And allows African Americans into the Army, what they called colored troops back then. That's the Emancipation Proclamation. He's also working on the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery everywhere when he's assassinated, and just passed the congressional level. He's the first president ever to say that blacks should have the voting right, although he offers it limited. He says African Americans who have been educated or are veterans of the Army or in the Army should have the right to vote. But he's still the first president ever to suggest blacks should have the right to vote, or at least some. And People forget he helps fund colleges, helps expand colleges, he helps expand railroads. The Homestead Act, helping people get land essentially for free after working for 5 years out west. So he does a lot of things in his, basically 4 years and a month as a president, because he gets killed real early into his second term. But overall, great president. But one thing a lot of kids mistake on is they think he runs for president his first time in 1860 saying, I'm going to end slavery. He never says that. He says, I'm going to stop the expansion of slavery. The big issue is expansion of slavery in the westward lands. Never says I'm going to abolish slavery in 1860 when he's running for president for the first time. A lot of kids get that wrong. It's a misconception. The next president's also a horrible one, just like James Buchanan was. Lincoln's kind of sandwiched between poor presidents here. Andrew Johnson, not to be confused with Lyndon Baines Johnson, but Andrew Johnson's a Southern Democrat, the only U.S. senator from the South who was loyal at the time of secession. He opposes the radical Republicans like Thaddeus Stevens. He refuses to give blacks their own lands, refuses to try to build black schools. We freed them, that's good enough. We shouldn't have to try to help them economically. He doesn't mind that blacks are exploited as sharecroppers for generations, really, after the Civil War. Considered one of the worst presidents. He's impeached, but the Senate finds him not guilty by just 1 vote, and you need 2/3, and he kind of backs off a bit after that. But the 18th president is Grant, former Civil War general. He passes the Force Act the Force Bill to try to ban the KKK. Because they're really terrorizing northern whites. We forget, the carpetbaggers, northern whites in the South, moving down there for business. But they're terrorizing African Americans. During this Reconstruction time period, blacks can vote. Grant is a supporter of that. There's a couple scandals during his presidency, like the Credit Mobilier, but none are directly linked to him. They're like friends he had put in power, kind of behind his back. But the Credit Mobilier, these railroad companies are ripping off the government. They're, lying about how many miles of train tracks they've built because the government's helping pay for that. So that's Grant's presidency. The next president is Hayes. Wins this famous Hayes-Tilden election. Hayes is a very controversial election in 1876 there, but Hayes gets the Northern Army out of the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. Then the Southern states start taking away black voting rights and so forth. A lot of people, including me, see this as a colossal mistake here that really should have or could have been avoided or done differently. The next president is Garfield. Unfortunately for him, he's going to get assassinated. He had been trying to look at meritocracy. Basically, the president gets to pick a lot of jobs and so forth, federal positions, try to make it based more on merit rather than patronage, i.e. Andrew Jackson was famous for patronage. You helped me get elected, I gave you a government job. All presidents have essentially done it, but Andrew Jackson was the king of it. Garfield's trying to reduce this, eliminate that. He actually gets killed by somebody who wanted a patronage job, thought that they deserved one. So unfortunately for him, he's murdered. So the 21st president would be his vice president, Arthur. And Arthur was originally this thing called a stalwart. The Republicans were stalwarts who supported this patronage system and didn't want a lot of reform in terms of trying to reduce patronage. And he opposed the half-breeds, which were Republicans who were kind of loyal to a lot of the old Republican beliefs, however wanted some reform on the patronage system. However, after his president is assassinated over it, he switches and he goes from a stalwart and he supports fixing patronage and passes the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which basically says that certain federal positions, you have to have certain qualifications to get them. Meritocracy. The 22nd and 24th president is Cleveland because he wins, loses, then wins. So we'll do Cleveland real quick here. Now Cleveland's a Democrat. But he's an interesting Democrat. He, like many Democrats, he opposes high tariffs, but not like not like a lot of Democrats, so he opposes the free silver of this time period. He's also talks a lot, speaks out against political corruption. He's an anti-imperialist. You know, he doesn't want us to be out annexing, you know, islands out in the Pacific and things like that. And he's against subsidies to farmers. He's, you know, he's kind of an interesting president in that light because he does some things like Democrats at the time, so he also does a few things like Republicans at the time. In between him, his two terms, is Benjamin Harrison, who has more influence than people remember him for. I mean, Benjamin Harrison, there's a lot of stuff passed under his term. You got the McKinley tariff, these absurdly high tariffs, a lot of people say, trying to protect American industry. But you also have the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which actually ends up hurting the economy. It's a compromise between the people out west who want unlimited silver or more silver, and then the people out east and the northeast who want the gold standard and only the gold standard. The government buys more silver. It gives you certificates you can redeem in gold or silver. A lot of the people were just taking the gold and with the certificates and not the silver. The gold levels of the government get depleted quick. But Benjamin Harrison, under his presidency too, you get this thing called the Sherman Antitrust Act, which doesn't initially do a lot of good, but then it will under later presidencies like Theodore Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. Sherman Antitrust Act, which can break up monopolies and so forth, is put into place here. And Benjamin Harrison does try, but in vain. He's not successful, but he does try to reinforce black voting rights after it had been taken away when Reconstruction ends under Hayes here. He does try to promote black voting rights, however, he's not successful with that. And then 24 is Cleveland again, so I'll just kind of skip him because we just talked about him there. And then the 25th president is kind of known as Imperial President. That's William McKinley. And William McKinley, you know, the Spanish-American War. You know, we fight Spain, we take over land in, you know, we take over Puerto Rico. It's still a U.S. territory today. We free Cuba from Spain. You know, yellow journalism. USS Maine exploding. The Philippines, and then the Philippine-American War, and he justifies it as, you know, we're civilizing, you know, the Philippines. You know, the Philippines at first were excited. They thought we were just going to throw out the Spanish and leave, but then we wanted as a stepping stone for trade into Asia. You know, expanding our booming industry and so forth. So McKinley's kind of seen as this imperial president. He's unfortunately assassinated too. And the next president is going to be Theodore Roosevelt. He didn't like being called Teddy, but I'm going to write Teddy up here anyways. But Teddy's influential president. Love him or hate him, he's seen as an imperialist too. You know, the Great White Fleet, basically forcing the construction of the Panama Canal against Columbia's wishes, basically helps Panama break off. But he does a lot of good though. You know, creates the FDA, the Meat Inspection Act. The FDA is still around today inspecting things that we eat, and toothpastes and prescription pills, and you know, and stuff like that. Starts breaking up monopolies and trusts. The first president to really do it effectively. He also national parks. You know, Theodore Roosevelt, very, very, very influential president. The coal strike, handles it aggressively. You know, threatens to send the army in if the management and the workers can't come to an agreement because people need coal to heat their homes. Teddy, very, very influential. Also helps prevent war between France and Britain over I believe it was Morocco. Helps end the war between Russia and Japan. Gets a Nobel Peace Prize. The 27th president here is going to be his handpicked successor, William Howard Taft. They have a falling out. They patch up later, but then Teddy dies. But Taft wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, not really a president. Taft continues trust busting. Actually does it more in his one term than Teddy did in his basically 7 years. You know, he had 2 terms, but one was most of McKinley's. And adds a little bit more land to national parks. He's a little bit more conservative. He's still progressive, I would say, because of the parks and the breaking up the trusts. But he's a little bit more conservative. You know, you got the Pinchot Ballinger affair. He supports a little bit higher tariffs than what he had originally said. Falling out, so the Republican Party split. That allows Woodrow Wilson to win the presidency in 1912. He's going to be a two-termer. He's very idealistic. He taught, he's a World War I president. He tries to ban child labor. Only happens for the Keating-Owens Act. Only happens for 2 years, but then it kind of is found unconstitutional. FDR later gets that done in the Great Depression era. But Wilson also passes the Clayton Antitrust Act to expand upon the government's powers to regulate business, protect unions. The 14 points, the most important being the League of Nations, the 14th point. He tries to put the 14 points in place to prevent future wars. World War I is a war to end all wars. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Warren G. Harding, a very scandalous president, cheats on his wife left and right. His campaign slogan is "Return to Normalcy." He's a president that's all about. He's a president that's all about kind of like laissez-faire. The government, the progressive presidents, Teddy, Taft, and Wilson, have gotten too involved with the government getting into the business. We need to back off. Let business be business. He dies early in his presidency there. And the next president is Calvin Coolidge, who sleeps through much of his presidency. He's also a laissez-faire guy. The business of America is business. Laissez-faire, let business do what it wants. But he's the last president we've had where the national debt was smaller on his last day in office than his first day. And so there's Coolidge. The 31st president is Hoover. Rugged individualism. The government shouldn't give individuals handouts. The Great Depression explodes on his watch. It's not completely his fault. There was overproduction in the 1920s. I think the Depression would have happened no matter who was president then, but he makes it worse though. For example, he takes money out of circulation. That makes the problem worse. He also raises the tariffs really high. Europe reciprocates, shuts down world trade. And you got the bonus army, on his watch, which is a huge blunder and fiasco. And he struggles. I think he's actually a good man. He actually did a lot of charity in his life, self-made man. Did, help feed starving people during World War I under Wilson. Good person, bad president in my opinion. But you have FDR, the next president, the New Deal, the fireside chats, utilizing the radio, new technology, getting into people's homes. Like years after FDR died, his wife Eleanor said, people would come up to her and say, I miss the way your husband used to talk to me, because he was just so calming and soothing. His first fireside chat calmed people down about the banking crisis. He had the banking holiday, shut down the banks. Inspectors only opened it if the banks were supposedly doing good business practices. The FDIC ensuring the money. The alphabet soup, the New Deal programs, the Civilian Conservation Corps, young boys and stuff going out planting trees. The NRA, which was found unconstitutional, kind of setting mandates for companies about how much to pay, how much to charge for your products, etc. World War II, the internment camps, so much goes on. He has so many problems to deal with: war in Europe, war in Asia, Great Depression, Dust Bowl. And he handles it well, and that's why Americans love him. He wins 4 elections, although he dies very, very, very early in his 4th term. So really only serves like 12 years and 3 months, roughly. The next president is Harry Truman. And he drops the atomic bombs. He's a big proponent of labor rights, unions, vetoes legislation that attacks unions, and helps desegregate the military. The Korean War, China turns communist on his watch, so he can't let Korea turn communist on his watch. So that happens there. The next president is Eisenhower, or Ike. And Eisenhower, Interstate Highway Act, enforcing some of these famous enforcings of the Brown v. Board or desegregation cases, like in Little Rock, sending in the 101st Airborne. NASA gets created on his watch. The St. Lawrence Seaway gets opened up, connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean with big freighters. The Erie Canal had existed previous, but now you can actually have the large freighters. Works with Canada on that. Eisenhower, he's the first Republican in a while, because FDR had won 4 elections. Truman won the 48th election. And they're worried he's going to undo what FDR had put in place. He doesn't. He increases Social Security. He increases the minimum wage, increases unemployment benefits. He believes in modern republicanism, which is, liberal with people, conservative with money. And so that's the Eisenhower presidency. Quickly ends the Korean War is what he does there. 30 uses the CIA in covert actions too. The next president, 35, is JFK. Unfortunately, he gets assassinated. JFK, Camelot, a young, cute family. He creates the Peace Corps. People travel around the world doing charitable stuff. Handles the Cuban Missile Crisis while, puts a naval barricade around Cuba so they can't ship the warheads in, although there were already some warheads there. The Bay of Pigs before the Cuban Missile Crisis was a bit of a fiasco. He took away the air and naval support, and then all the Cuban Americans, or the Cubans that we had trained, to go back and overthrow the communist Fidel, get basically captured or killed. And he talks a lot, but he's not able to get a lot done, in part because he's assassinated. But 36 is LBJ, the great legislator. He lowers taxes for the poor and the middle class and the rich, like JFK had wanted. LBJ does the 64 Civil Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act, big, huge things that help drive our country forward. However, the Vietnam War just drags his presidency down. He lies about it, uses the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to expand the war. He escalates the war dramatically. But the war on poverty, the Great Society. Some people say he had a great domestic policy, horrible foreign policy with the Vietnam War and stuff going on, and the lies about that. The next president is Nixon, a very controversial president. He resigns from office before they can impeach him, but he creates the EPA, opens up relations with communist China, travels there. Detente, easing the Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union. He even proposes the Family Assistance Plan, saying that all working households deserve an American standard of living, and the government will help pay you money to get up to that amount if you make less than it. Yeah, that's kind of Nixon in a nutshell. Oh, the Vietnamization to try to replace American soldiers with South Vietnamese to bring more people home. The Watergate scandal is going to bring him down. He covered it up for sure. You probably knew about it in advance. The committee to re-elect the president had broken into the office complex at Watergate. And so that really brings and drags Nixon's presidency down. The next president, Ford, is the vice president under Nixon's, not actually initially, it was Spiro Agnew. He winds up in jail too. So Ford's the only person never to be elected vice president or president, but still get to be president. Tries to carry on a lot of Nixon policies. However, it's very controversial, and he pardons Nixon. That probably really hurts his chances for re-election, or for election, really. And Carter's going to beat him. Jimmy Carter, the Georgian governor, the peanut farmer. So Carter basically, he has stagflation, and so did Ford and Nixon a little bit at the end, and a stagnant economy, high inflation, the high gas prices. OPEC kind of cuts off the flow a bit, raising our gas prices. Energy, problems, energy prices to the roof. He tells people, put on a sweater, turn down your thermostat. People don't want to hear that. People want to hear the president saying, make energy prices cheaper and do it instantly. The Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel gets some peace there. The Iran hostage crisis drags down his presidency. People see him as ineffective at freeing these hostages. They're freed right under Reagan, although Carter had been working behind the scenes to get that done. He doesn't get the credit for it because he doesn't get it done under his presidency, even though he essentially secured their release. But Carter really struggles there. Next president we have is, we're going to go with Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, former actor, great at speaking, he undoes some of the environmental regulations put in place by Nixon and LBJ. But a lot of people see him as this winner of the Cold War. He gets the Soviets to stop pointing nukes at Europe. going to Berlin and saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Remember Truman had the Berlin airlift, the Berlin Wall's built under JFK, that comes down, in what would it be, actually 89 under Bush Sr., but you start to see it about to come down right under Reagan there with that famous speech. And Reagan inherits an economy that's doing horrible. And then right before re-election time, the economy's picked back up. The economy's great in his second term. So Reagan's popular in large part because of the improving economy. He's known for Reaganomics, the trickle-down economics. Very controversial with the idea that you help the suppliers, you help the producers, and in his mind with tax breaks. And then once they're doing better, they'll hire more, pay more, and those benefits then will trickle throughout the economy. 41 is Bush Sr. And Bush Sr., Desert Storm, frees Kuwait from Iraq, helps Americans with disability. His problem is he says, read my lips, no new taxes, but then he raises taxes because, the government spending, he didn't really want to, but the government spending was a bit out of control and he didn't want the debt to go up too, so he reluctantly raises taxes. Then you have Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, good economy. He got the baby boomers born after World War II. They're in their peak spending years. The internet's new and booming, or at least relatively new. And most people are find out about it. The internet's booming, helping businesses grow. But you do see some trouble though too, like bipartisan Republicans and Democrats together repeal Glass-Steagall that FDR put in place banking regulations. The current president, Barack Obama, blames that as the primary driver of the bad economy today, of the mess we're in. You see the dot-com stocks crash at the very end of his presidency. The recession starts 6 weeks after he leaves office. The Lewinsky scandal drags down his presidency a bit, but most people see him as a good president because throughout the vast majority of his 8 years, the economy was doing fine, and people like a good economy. And so 43 is George W. Bush, the most recent Bush, and two-termer, just like Clinton. And essentially, you have 9/11, which shapes his presidency. We go into Afghanistan and in Iraq. Although at first they're both popular, they start to weigh on the American public as they drag on, and there's no good resolution in sight. And so that kind of starts to take a toll. The economy actually had something like over 50 months of growth during his presidency, but then at the end, like around 2008, the bottom just falls out right in his final year in office there. The economy just takes a toll for the worse. You have this housing bubble, which people debate about when it started. Some people say it started in like 1997, some people started later. But it just bottoms out in his presidency. You have the banking crisis, the stock market just collapses. And so he finishes his presidency is very unpopular. And then we have our current president, who is Barack Obama. And probably not going to be on the test, but known for things like the Affordable Health Care Act, more commonly known as Obamacare. You have Lilly Ledbetter Act for more fair pay between genders. JFK actually had signed an equal pay act too for women and men back then. But yeah, so that is. Stimulus too spends a lot of money to help try to revive the economy that was down, that he inherited from George W. Bush there. But all right, there's just a quick review of the presidents. I hope you learned something.